Clash of the Classics.
Hey everyone, that's right, it's time for Clash of the Classics. I recognize that opening. It's one of our favorite segments. I'm Donnie. I'm your guide here on Horsepower for an Hour, and my partner in crime here, our historian for these battles, is Mr. Tom Spence. And we have Mr. Glenn Eldridge. He's our newest panel member. He's our commentator. He's an automotive columnist. Great to have him on the team. If you're new to our show, perhaps this is the first time you've tuned us in, well, here's what you're going to find. You're going to discover that every week we roll the clock back. We pit two classic models against one another. Then we go head-to-head with styling. We look at powertrain. We might look at some interior stuff. We might look at some exterior stuff, design features. Then we vote on the car that we like best. We always try to have fun with this, and then we welcome you to join us and let us know which car you prefer. These battles are fueled by National Parts Depot for the finest in classic car restoration parts. Got to check them out at npdlink.com. Today the showdown is between the 1949 Mercury Coupe and the 1949 Ford Custom Two-Door. Now, that 1949 Mercury is going to get us started. This was the first post-war model from Mercury, and it has become an icon in the automotive classic world. Spence, speaking of Mercury, we do see the 49 Merc probably with greater frequency than any other Mercury that we get the chance to view at the car shows that we attend. Glenn, you have a show that you do once a year down in Buena Park. We've talked about it many times. That is a show that we see, a plethora of 49 Mercs on. But the 49, I don't know that there's a car, period, whether it be Ford, Chevy, it doesn't matter who makes it. 1949 was an awesome year for the automotive industry. Would you agree?
I definitely agree. It was post-war, like you said. They were just coming into a new era, and people were thinking differently, and they were looking into families and lives and stuff. And yeah, definitely.
I'll tell you, the styling on the 49, it is awesome. But this car, this 49 Merc we're talking about, 255 cubic inch, flathead V8, plenty powerful for the time. There was an optional overdrive that was activated by a handle under the dash, which I always kind of thought was kind of interesting. Wasn't too sure I liked that, but it was there nonetheless. Transmission was a non-synchronized 3-speed, and you really had to know how to drive a 3-speed back in those days. Otherwise, you had a lot of clashing going on, no pun intended. But the new 1949 Mercury used full instrumentation. It was one of the most comfortable cars of the time period. The interior was, at least in my opinion, spacious, plenty roomy. Believe it or not, was one of the lighter cars at a mere 4,000 pounds, Spence.
4,000 pounds. Thank goodness gas was 26 cents a gallon. Yeah. And back then, did they even care? Was that on the radar? Who knows?
Yeah, 49, I don't know that was necessarily, because it was a pretty prosperous time, if I'm correct.
Well, for the U.S., it was wonderful because, remember, the war did not happen on our land. In England, it was still a tragedy because they had to rebuild, and it took a long time to do that. But we were just absolutely ready to go. The boys were back. The economy was firing, and we were looking for new stuff.
Well, Ford V8 was becoming the hot topic of those days. It was a few years later that Gil Younger, a friend of mine, started experimenting with the Ford cast-iron Cruise-O-Matic transmission for racing. Didn't work out too well. The cases kept breaking near the center, but that's another story for another day. But I think it was about that time that old man Edelbrock started playing around with some manifold designs in those days. But this 49 Mercury originally sold new for $2,409. Here today, they're worth $75,000 or more, depending on the shape. Want to start with you, Spence. Talk to us a little bit about 1949, what was going on back in those days, and then what do you think of this car?
Average cost on a car back then was $1,650. So you were going up on this. That was a little expensive. You looked at what was going on. A house was $14,500. This is a national average. Salary, you were around $3,600. So this car, for the average person, would still take a chunk. But there was prosperity. There were people, like Glenn said it so well, it was when designs were blowing up and people were getting creative. We were so tired of being stuck in that awful period, which for the world was a decade. 39 to 49, that's when the war started, when Hitler invaded Poland. So talk about a time where you finally just wanted to let it go, and everything happened, including a lot of baby booms. So as this car goes, I love it. I think it's just gorgeous because whoever designed this was into the style. He was into the beauty, the originality. I love this car.
And then you made it come just off topic for a moment. Baby boomers were 46 to 64. Is that correct?
Yeah, right in there. Yeah, just right after the war, everybody got busy and started making families and making beautiful cars.
You like this 49 Merc?
I do. I like how it's just kind of stretched out. It has some styling in it. That's very cool.
It's difficult. There's a guy in our club, the Coachman. I can't think of his Ed. I think is his name. He's got a black one.
Ed L.
Yeah, Ed L. Yep, it's got a beautiful 49 Merc. Very nice car. But before I go any further, I want to tell you whether you're looking for simple replacement parts, you need replacement parts of any kind, restoration stuff, performance upgrades, whatever you're looking for. NPD, these are the go-to guys. Check their catalogs for part availability. National Parts Depot makes our Clash of the Classics possible. No one knows classics better than NPD. Big shout out to Rick Schmidt and his entire crew. They do a fantastic job. I frequent the National Parts Depot location here in Southern California, and those guys are well prepared, very professional. Every time I go in, I get what I need. It is the auto parts store to end all other auto parts store. All right, let's take a look at that 1949 Ford Custom Two-Door Coupe. Now, Ford threw a huge celebration bash back in those days at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel here in out in New York. Back in June of 1948, there was an actual carousel, believe this or not, that continuously rotated the car just outside the hotel, and it was showing off the all-new steel chassis. Ford advertised it as the lifeguard body. The engines were about the only carryovers from 1948. The popular 226 cubic inch displacement L-head straight six-cylinder engine and the 239 flathead V8 remained and were rated at 90 horsepower for the straight six and then 100 horsepower for that V8, which is pretty good for those days. Transmission was a fully synchronized 3-speed manual. The suspension, pretty solid for the time period. And this was a car that supposedly saved Ford, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One of the things that Ford was struggling right there during the war, just prior to the war, but the Depression was happening. There was a lot of things that were struggling for Ford. The shoebox Ford was the model that supposedly saved it. The interior was, at least in my opinion, utilitarian, no nonsense. The gauge layout consisted of a speedometer, a gas gauge, and all in one, and then the warning lights for use for oil pressure and battery voltage. The AM radio back in those days, that occupied the center of the dash, and that was the extent of interior instrument cluster, instrument panel. There wasn't anything more. Now, this car falls in line with the number you talked about earlier with the Mercury. This original MSRP, about $1,590, which was about what the average car running for back in those days, correct?
Yeah, that was we're at $1,600.
So
just under.
A couple bucks under that. And today, this car doesn't. Interesting. The Mercury is worth about twice as much. These cars, depending on the shape and how well it's been protected, how well it's been restored, these cars can be $50,000 or more. In some cases, less, but usually about $50,000 on the 49 Ford, depending on how well it has been preserved. But I like between these two cars. I'll start with you, Spence. And we have them up here on our monitor in studio. The Mercury has a timeless look. The Mercury has a very classic look. The Ford reminds me more of a Henry Fonda type movie. It's a cool looking car. Which one do you like and why?
I am all for the Mercury. All for the other one's kind of cool, but the Mercury is really cool. It's designed that's unique, and it's coming at you, going away any which way. It's a cool looking car. By the way, 1984 was written in 1949.
Oh, really?
Well, talk about forward thinking, my goodness. But yeah, I'm all for the Mercury.
Yeah, George Barris, we talked to him recently. In fact, we were with him at one point. Glenn, you and I were with him at one of the shows we did. He's now passed on. He and his brother Sam Barris built the first lead sled out of a new 1949 flathead V8. So pretty good stuff there. So we have one with Mercury. That's Mr. Spence. Mr. Glenn, who do you like and why?
Well, it's a good thing they're both Ford, right?
Well, they are. It's a both Ford Motor Company, but
Well, it's close enough.
Yeah, so I see where you're going with this. In other words, you can't go wrong with it.
I can't go wrong this time.
None of your car club buddies are going to want to whoop on you.
I know. I've been blowing it over the past few weeks.
Yeah, because you've been going into the Chevrolets for a little bit lately. Yeah,
not too loud. Mercury, it's got to be Mercury.
Yeah, okay.
I really like that style.
Yeah, and I agree with you two guys. I mean, this probably wasn't much of a fair comparison. I liked it because they're both, it is both Ford Motor Company, the 49 custom two-door, and I said it at the top of this discussion. It's difficult for me personally, whether you're talking about a Ford, a Mercury, a Chrysler, a Chevrolet, a Cadillac, it doesn't matter. Anything in 1949 is kind of like a 1956. It's difficult to find a car in the 1956 model year that's not totally cool. Same thing with the 1949. Difficult for me to find a car in 1949 that I didn't like. But in this, I have to choose one. For this battle, I'm with you guys 100%. So we're going to need you folks out there to chime in with our Facebook page or on our website. Let us know which car you like best. I'm rolling with the 1949 Mercury as well. I don't think there's a finer car out there. This thing is iconic in the world of classics. If you got a classic ride, you're in the middle of a classic build, you're just considering getting into classic car restoration, do yourself a favor, visit NPD. You can find them 24 hours a day at npdlink.com. They make our Clash of the Classics possible. Big shout out to Rick Schmidt, his entire crew. Thanks so much. We got a bunch more coming up. We'll check in with the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association, and we'll look at the possibility of Cadillac offering a mid-engine V-Series model to complement that all-new mid-engine Vet due next year. You don't want to miss that. Stay in your seats. We'll be right back. We are your ultimate stop in automotive radio. We are Horsepower for an Hour.